even when progressives have won the party has more than once undermined them. Yeah. Or at least not the whole of the party, but portions of it. And I have a big section of the book on George McGovern. And, George McGovern was nominated in 1972 for President of the United States. And, people like to say that the Sanders platform from 2016 was the most progressive platform in the party's history. No. The party had for the moment, at least, platforms several times that were at least as progressive as the 2016 platform. And McGovern certainly did that. If you read that platform from 72, it was amazing. And who they were trying to bring into the party, how they were trying to really build a coalition. And the interesting thing was, McGovern made a lot of mistakes. I interviewed him. I knew him in his later years. He acknowledged his mistakes. They were clear. There's no doubt of that. And maybe he had made so many mistakes that he wouldn't have been president. That's possible. But I will tell you this. Most of the criticisms of George McGovern, the attacks on George McGovern that Nixon launched in the fall, were initially launched by Hubert Humphrey and Scoop Jackson in the primaries. They identified him in ways in the primaries that the Republicans just picked up. And then here's the interesting thing. Once he was nominated, there was a massive group called Democrats for Nixon. It literally included members of Congress, senators, mayors. They spent millions of dollars. They had full-page ads in newspapers across the country, Democrats for Nixon. And it was heavily funded, very successful. And so, now everybody says, oh, McGovern, he was the most failed candidate. He got beaten horribly. We never want to do McGovern again. Well, with all due respect, if the Democratic Party had actually tried to elect the guy, even the AFL-CIO didn't back McGovern in 1972. They didn't back him. And so he was so pushed, he was so marginalized. He still got 40% of the vote on an incredibly progressive platform. So what I would tell you is that when things like that happen, what you have to realize is that if you're in a fight for the soul of the Democratic Party, you actually have to fight for it. Yeah. And you have to recognize that the people on the other side are fighting too. And so what you want to do is, then we get to this last idea that you've brought up of, a real struggle, and taking on folks, in that food chain of the party, challenging at the DNC level, challenging in primaries, and frankly, just with information, like you suggest. That is a part of this. I mean, it's one part of it. It's not the whole of it. There also has to be a visionary, optimistic, and positive part of it. Something that people want to join and want to be a part of. And so as I was thinking about doing this interview with you, because I'm doing a number of interviews on the book, but I was looking forward to talking to you. And because I know you play this interesting role. You report, but you're also in the thick of it. And so I went back and I read something that Ron Dellums, who is my hero, and Ron Dellums was congressman it was 50 years ago this spring that Ron Dellums took on a 6-term Democratic incumbent who was a liberal in a primary in Berkeley and Oakland, and beat that liberal in the primary because he said, you don't need liberals now, you need radicals. There's the Vietnam War, playing out of the civil rights movement, poverty still a real issue. And Ron Dellums went to Congress, served for decades, never lost his principles, served as a champion of democratic socialist ideals, of progressive ideals, of racial and economic justice. And then he went back to California, and late in life, he was elected mayor of Oakland and served a time there. In 2016, right after the election, he wrote an essay on how we should deal with Trump. And the interesting thing was most of the essay was about, I shouldn't say most of it, a substantial portion was about the Democratic Party. And he was very, very blunt about saying that, we have to fight Trump, but we also have to fight to make a Democratic Party that is strong enough to fight Trump. That's right. That is bold enough and visionary enough and forward-looking enough, not merely to beat this guy, but to make sure that it never happens again, to move our politics sufficiently to the left so that the Republicans have to move toward the center. And this is the quote-unquote genius of the Republican side. They move so far to the right that the Democrats always move to the center. What if the Democrats were pulling things in the other direction. And so I commend Dellum's essay. And a lot of these stories, this history is valuable, not because, we just want to be told a good story. It's valuable because it's important to understand that these fights are not about political parties. They're about a set of values and ideals, and they're about whether we have options on the table at critical points in our history. Mm-hmm. And if one party is pulling its punches, if it's standing down, if it's just trying to win the election of the moment, but not necessarily looking at the long term to build something out, mm-hmm. you end up in a situation where the dynamic energy too often in our politics is on the other side. Mm-hmm. And we're arguing about the issues of the other side. I can tell you this without a question, that if the Democratic Party had made an absolute commitment to single-payer Medicare for all in the 1990s, we'd have it today. Yeah. It might have been some lost elections along the way, but the movement would have built, the moment would have come. And if the Democratic Party had moved more to the left in the 90s, the 2000s, even the 2010s, when we got to this current moment that we are in, think about it, because we're in a crisis moment and it's overwhelming and we're struggling to find answers. Well, the fact is there's a lot of answers,
right?
But it's hard to push them to the center of our politics when you haven't been talking about them for a long time.
Right.
So.
And when the party has abandoned so much of the country, we said this on the Unity Reform Commission over and over. It's one thing to have the right message at a moment, but if you don't have messengers across the country every single election cycle repeating that message, that's how Donald Trump can swoop in and basically take advantage of that.
Oh, and it frustrates me so much. It's funny, I have a piece that I wrote just for today about the ruralorganizing.com. It's a group that's trying to organize progressives in rural America, and arguing that the fact is you shouldn't give up on rural America. If you mobilize people in the right way, there's a mass of progressive votes out there. And they're trying to save the Postal Service. They got 300,000 people to sign petitions. They got 25,000 people to agree, mostly rural, to agree to write handwritten letters and put a stamp on it, to save the Postal Service. And they got this incredible guy, Joe Troop, to write a song for him. And it's straight out of Woody Guthrie. It's beautiful and amazing. And it's speaking right to rural America and speaking right to small town folks. And it just seems to me, I don't want to be overly romantic about this, but the fact of the matter is the greatest thing that Henry Wallace did was in his failed 1948 campaign, he refused to speak to segregated audiences. And he took a tour of the South. He went deep into the South. There are pictures of him. He had to eat his lunches in his car because the restaurants were segregated. They slept in the homes of friends. He was down there with, union folks, Paul Robeson, people like that. And his running mate, Glenn Taylor, senator from Idaho, was literally arrested for refusing to go in through a whites-only door to a meeting. They pushed the limit. They went deep into the South. And the fact of the matter is that in doing the book, I talked to people who were very old, people who were, people now in their 90s, who remembered that. They remembered that somebody came and tried. And the fact of the matter is that the Democratic Party, if it's to be the party that it should be, it ought to be the party that comes and tries, even if it's very difficult for immigrants and for people without documentation and for LGBTQ kids in small towns and rural areas, and for trade unionists who are organizing now in some of the most difficult circumstances imaginable, and for women still struggling with insufficient pay and insufficient respect, and for, frankly, the working class, and the precariat, those folks who really now are even struggling to be in the working class. I believe I believe strongly that when Franklin Roosevelt outlined an economic Bill of Rights, he assured that he would be reelected to a fourth term. And I am absolutely convinced that if a Democratic Party genuinely outlined an economic Bill of Rights, and frankly, a new civil rights agenda, a new civil liberties agenda, I do not believe this would marginalize. I don't, even as bad as our media is, even as bad as our politics is, I think this is the breakthrough moment. And, you know, the funny thing about it is I went with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you know, and working on the book. We were in Detroit, where Wallace had gone in 43 to do the great speech challenging racism. And we talked a little bit about it one night, and we were late at night. It was midnight in Dearborn, Michigan. And she said the best thing. It's the closing line of the book. We were talking about, you know, these folks who went when nobody else would go, and who challenged the orthodoxies, and who challenged imperialism and colonialism and racism and sexism in the 40s. And she said, not that she wanted to recreate everything. She had this wonderful line. She says, I want to be that party again. I want to be the party that tries that hard. And the fact of the matter is, that's part of why I wrote the book.
I can't wait to read it. It is out now. I have it on, but we've been talking about this, and as an issue I clearly care about a lot. And I think it's the theme of this show is just what your book is about. It's why we exist. It's, you know, a lot of people host shows for a lot of reasons. I didn't want to focus on the scandal of the day. I really wanted to focus on what it takes to win this lifetime fight. And it, you know, it's a constant fight. It's a hard fight. I think we all would prefer to be in a different circumstance right now, even electorally, but, you know, we must garner on. We can't give up. It has been worse, if we can believe it. And that's why it's important to read history. So John, I appreciate you for doing this work, for reporting, for trying. Yeah. Because the other end of this, which you illustrated in that first book that I read, how I Met You, about journalism, is it's just not the same anymore. And there isn't a lot of trying for a whole lot of reasons. And there aren't a lot of reporters out there who can, even if they could, you know, it's just, we don't have state house reporters. We don't have local reporters at the level that we used to. So thank you. Thank you for doing this.
I'm not going to give up. You know, when Roosevelt or when Henry Wallace was on the campaign trail, he campaigned with Pete Seeger at his side.
Oh my God. And
Pete Seeger always sang it late at night when they'd had, you know, a rough rally in the South or someplace. He would always ask Pete Seeger to sing a song to him. And the song was Passing Through. It was a relatively recently written folk song. So cool. And the close of the song was, I was at Franklin Roosevelt's side on the night before he died. He said, one world must come out of World War II. Yankee, Russian, black or tan, you know, a man is still a man. We're all on one road and we're only passing through. And
chills.
They would sit, and Wallace and Seeger would sit and sing that song in the back of a car or the back of a bus. And the only reason I bring it up is that core vision, the only thing I'd change in the lyrics would say one man and maybe one woman. But at some fundamental level, that core vision that we're fighting for humanity.
Thank you for watching The Nomiki Show. You can support us on YouTube by clicking subscribe, like, and sharing to get those alerts. And patrons, well, they make this show run on time. So thanks to all of you who have joined our community already. If you like our content and want more, from special segments to interviews and merch, you can join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. I'm spending all of my iced coffee money on other people's shows because I think this is the time that we have to support our independent media.